I've just started the record button, and so I'm going to kick off our meeting today. Hi, I'm Jonathan Fisher, your host and moderator for our program at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, our biweekly Zoom meeting, and today is May 8th, 2024. And May 8th, folks, it was all gentlemen today. It's important because this is Give Big, and we've got Give Big going on, and this is a very important time of year. You know, PNRA provides programming such as this as a public service, and one of the ways that, you know, we could sort of give back to the mother or fatherland is by participating in Give Big. Gary Tarbox, could you unmute for a second and just talk a little bit from your perspective about the importance of Give Big, please?
Well, Give Big is important, of course, by the fact that individual contributions to PNRA have always been the bread that kept the thing afloat. We certainly pay a lot of our overhead costs with the individual contributions, and it also shows the fact that we're still regarded as relevant by our constituents. The Friends campaign that we have basically is a two-part. It's if you work at the archive for 30 hours a month, or 30 hours a year, I should say.
Right. Yeah.
And
30 hours a month,
you're considered to be a friend of the PNRA. And then also, if you give $25 or more to the organization, you also are a friend. Either one of those will qualify you. And they've been that way since we started.
So Gary, you mentioned something that's really important, folks, and I want to make sure that this doesn't get overlooked. And that is, there's Jack Christensen. It isn't the size of the gift that's as important as just your participation. And the numbers of people that give are just as important as the amount that you give. And just like they say on Jazz 24, you know, give an amount that you can afford to give, and that is the right way to go. Beth Ann Mayer has joined us, and I'm going to interrupt this program for a special guest, Beth Ann Mayer, and I want you to unmute, and I want to introduce you first to Russell Holter, PNRA Board President. There you go, got the peace sign from the Sarge. And also Gary Tarbox, our Executive Director Emeritus, is here. Gary, if you could just wave for Beth Ann. And there's Gary. So, and Beth Ann, also directly above you in my grid is Steve Howes from the Sumter Valley Railroad, who you've had some contact with. And Beth Ann, if you could just take a second, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and how is it that you can work miracles like you have. So go ahead, please.
Nothing like putting me on the spot.
I mean, you know, welcome, by the way, and we're glad to have you as an extra special guest today on our program. And thanks for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Beth Ann Marr. I'm the Executive Director of Western Forest Industries Museum, which is both the founding and current nonprofit that administers our little project called Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad. And we through a whole lot of really riveting legal back and forth and all of those things, a group of local business owners in the Eatonville area, as well as former employees of Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad, were able to sort of revitalize our nonprofit with them and get ownership, acquire the railroad and our nonprofit and the museum and all of the things associated with it. So that happened in late 2022. And in the meantime, we've sort of reinvigorated our volunteer program, and we launched our rail bike operation in June of 2023 with rail cycles that we designed and built. And then September 1st, we started operating trains again. And I'm working on a grant. So I just figured out that we've operated 148 trains so far, all pulled with steam engine Pulson 70, and we've been operating at 95.9% capacity. So we've carried almost
This is
23,000
amazing.
people since we reopened. And we've just had an incredible amount of support from our volunteers in the community, and we're just really, really grateful for the warm response and reception that we've had. And we're sort of, to try and keep it short, we're just prioritizing railroad operations, but working on some, big restoration projects. And we're also slowly working on reopening the museum, and doing perhaps a little bit better job of some storytelling of the folks who lived alongside and worked on the railroad, and really highlighting some of the stories of the people behind this railroad, both in its early logging days, but also the history of Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad, sort of starting with Camp 6 and Tom Murray, Jack Anderson, all of those folks, because I think that it's really important that we honor their contributions and the massive amount of work that folks did in the early days getting this railroad up and running off the ground. So we want to make sure that we're telling those stories as part of our story too. So that's
There you-
us. And I'm in our massive and break room with our new shop cats in the background, if you're wondering
there
about
you
the
go. There you
background.
go. George Foster has a question for you, George.
Beth Ann, I have some involvement with Camp 6 from around 1967
Awesome.
when they had the KL&L shade number 90, the Pacific Coast, I guess it is. And the original engineer from that railroad, Norm Elsner, and his fireman was Lance, let's see, try again, Vance Collier. So former UP employee. And then after, let's see, around 69, I met Jack Anderson when the UP 6900 was displayed at UP's Tacoma Freight Office for the public. And then during my military years, I wasn't able to go out there at all, of course. But after I exited in 75, then I could go back out there to Camp 6 and volunteer a little bit. And my father and I did some repair work on the UP caboose, the 25722. Yeah, and in fact, I did a real good pratfall off of that thing while we were working on the siding. So I have some history with that and
Yeah.
everything. And then Jack Anderson was one of the guys I met at the UP display down there at Tacoma. And he was a mutual friend of mine and my future wife's. She goes, I know him. And I go, yeah, okay, right. And then we're out one day and we see him and he goes, oh, hi, Vicky. And he completely ignores me. So a little egg on my face.
Funny.
But anyway, so, we used to go up to the Mount Rainier in the 80s and 90s. And I really miss Jack. He was a great guy. And he and his friend Steve Thompson, who I think is still around, did some great artwork and everything. So that's kind of where I came from as far as being associated with any kind of museum efforts or anything like that. So I'm glad to meet you, and it'll be an interesting time. I'm living in Oregon, so if I get a chance, I'll try to get up and see you guys sometime.
Yeah, I'd love
And
to.
I'll let you go now and you can have some further discussion with others here.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to connect with you at some point on some of that. We're trying to collect some stories of the early days.
Yeah,
So
I can send you both an email after the
fantastic.
program and get you in contact with George that way, and you guys can swap more stories. Now, spoiler alert, folks, I'm shamelessly begging Beth Ann to come back this fall and do a presentation on the resurrection of the Mount Rainier Scenic at one of our bi-weekly programs. So, and so she'll be back. And so Beth Ann, you know, interestingly, you talked about capturing the stories of workers, and that is central to our theme today. So, but first I'm going to ask Russell Holter, PNRA board president. I mean, you know, folks, I mean, you got to think about it. We got Joe Biden in town on Friday. We got Russell Holter at our Zoom program today. I mean, we've got the brass all over the place. So Russ, first, welcome to the program. It's just really great to have you here, Mr. President. So, and tell us a little bit about some of the exciting stuff that they're working on, you know, at the office behind the scenes to make PNRA, you know, the cool thing that it is.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. And you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but that's okay because I appreciate your efforts in making sure that PNRA is front and center when it comes to donations. And Beth Ann, you'll appreciate the fact that this week is Give Big Week nationwide, statewide anyway. You know, as Gary was mentioning earlier, it's very important part of PNRA's campaign to be able to acquire all the operating funds necessary to be able to stay relevant throughout the year. The one thing that Gary did not mention is that we only have one campaign every year, and Bethan is probably going, why? And let me tell you why. And that's because we are very conscientious of the fact that, you know, we are a service organization to regional heritage organizations in the Northwest. And we are not in the business of trying to scalp or kite or do any of those types of things that would kind of diminish the members of our RHOs and their ability to be able to give to those organizations in which they support. So if we did, it would look like we were kind of raiding the pots of the organizations that were there to support. And so it's very important for us that we do this outreach once a year and let people know we are not going to come back and repeatedly every quarter or like some of those pledge-a-thons constantly berate you for donations. This is the one and only time that we're going to do that. So I gave yesterday, and I hope that you would consider going to our website and giving big for the support of PNRA. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Gary, for mentioning that. Bethan is far too modest about her abilities, and I challenge anybody in this room to be able to top her when it comes to delivering babies. She has twins. And that's a miracle.
Same day as we started the railroad. Go figure.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so Beth Ann, so Russell brought this up. So you need to tell us about the coincidence there, right? I mean, let's just
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, it's yeah, so I was pregnant with twins, which nothing like being pregnant with twins and reopening a railroad at the same time. Don't recommend it. But probably not an issue for the folks in this room. Too many of you. But no, my due date was October 3rd, but of course it's 2 days before the railroad was supposed to open, and I'm on site here, and I tell my operations manager, Rowdy, who I'm sure many of you know, I say, something's going on. I'm not in labor, but something's going on. And then I, go home and tell my husband the same thing. And then the next day send Rowdy a text message that's, hey, I'm going to be out of communication for a little bit. Said, hopefully I'll make opening day. Which I did not. So, yeah, no. So I went into labor and had the twins, and my husband is never going to forgive me because every picture he has of the day, because I wasn't expecting him going into labor, I'm on my phone, like giving people passcodes to like our gift shop software and retail and checking ticket sales obsessively because what else would you do? Um, but was trying to get updates, and Rowdy had put everyone in a strict no contact order because he didn't want to stress me out, which was of course stressing me out more. Um, but anyway, the railroad ended up, the first train was supposed to depart the station at 11 o'clock, but there had been a microburst the night before. So they had trouble getting to Elby, and they'd had to, chainsaw through a whole lot of brush and debris. And then they got to Elby and they discovered that some genius had tried to steal some copper from out under our baggage car. And instead of stealing the copper, they had taken all the PVC pipe that connected the toilet to the holding tank. So they had to do a quick repair, and when folks asked Brian Wise, our road foreman, if they wanted to press charges, he said, no, 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 I think we're okay with what we lost. This, go figure. But anyway, so the train was late, and I ended up giving birth to twin number 2 at 12:05 p.m., which is the same exact time that so Alfred was born at the same exact time that the first train pulled out of the station. So go figure. The first on our form, it says 12:05 was our departure time for the first train, and they had, standing room only on board and all of that. So and of course it was about an hour later after we called everyone, and I told my mom, and then I was like on the phone with Rowdy, like, so how'd it go? Why was the train late? And Tony, my husband, is, never gonna forgive me for that because he says I gave birth to the railroad, and the twins just happen to be a little byproduct, but anyway.
Well,
Well,
there you go.
congratulations. Yeah, we think
congratulations.
you're a
And
trooper.
welcome today, by the way. So Russell Holter, you've got a presentation for us, and why don't you, unless you've got some more news about PNRA, some of the projects we're working on?
We just had our big spring cleanup on April the 28th, and we moved about 5 cubic yards of garbage out of the archive. About half of that was from the Boeing Employee Model Railroad Club. And they did yeoman work in kind of decluttering their area. We're trying to make the area a little bit safer and easier to maneuver when the public comes in to be able to see the railroad. So that was a terrific effort. We were kind of surprised at how many people showed up, considering that it was a spring cleaning and work party. I do have one non-PNRA related item I wanted to bring up, and that is for those of you that are in. Oh, I'm sorry, Joel, you had a question, and that was, does it matter whether you give big now or whether you do it later? It's just that this is our annual campaign, so to speak. You can give to the organization at any time throughout the year by using the web portal, or if you're like me, writing out paper checks. We're both are appreciated 52 weeks out of the year, as both Gary and Jonathan will testify.
That's right.
Thank you, Joel. Those of you that are in Washington State, you may be interested in an event that's coming up on May the 18th, which is a Saturday at noon. All Aboard Washington is having their annual meeting, and it'll be at the River's Edge Restaurant in Tumwater. Good friend of mine, Jeff Schultz, is going to be the guest speaker. He was very instrumental in developing Amtrak Cascades 20 years ago. The big news about the annual meeting is that Lloyd Flamm, longtime president of the All Aboard Washington, is going to be stepping down, and is, for health reasons, is trying to scale back his collection. And so there's going to be some very significant and unique items that are going to be available at a silent auction that day at the River's Edge Restaurant at noon on May the 18th. So I just wanted to put that plug in there. The real reason why we're here is because I wanted to talk to you about some of the contributions that have been made by different ethnic groups in the development of the railroads. Don't think that that's a topic that gets covered very much. And I don't know if I have permission to be able to.
You do have permission to share your screen. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to mention that the John Wayne Trail Riders are going to be in South Cle Elum also on Saturday morning, May 18th. So you should be enabled to share, Russ. So we'll just.
I don't see the thing where you. Oh, never mind. Okay, whiteboard app reactions show. Whoop, come back here. Share screen up, and I want that one.
Russ, a couple another question came through during the chat, and that has to do with matching. And does PNRA receive a match on these contributions?
We haven't had anyone that let's see, you can match through Give Big if your organization has matches, but we don't have anyone that stepped up and said, I will match anybody's contributions during.
So for example, if you worked for like Boeing or something and Boeing did an employee match.
Microsoft.
Yeah. So, okay, very good. Thank you for that.
They will match.
And I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I promise I'm going to not bug you.
Promise?
What? Okay, I understand what Russell Holter is, but what's an MAH?
Masters of Art in History.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. All right. That's the one question I had. And with that, Russ, I'm going to mute and take it away.
Okay. So in preparing a context document for the railroads vast contributions to Washington state history, I kept stumbling across these really fascinating nuggets about different ethnic groups. And the one that always kind of seems to rise to the forefront is always the Chinese and their development and their role that they played in the development of the railroads, especially the Northern Pacific. But in writing the book Rails to Paradise, what Clark Maccabee and I, my co-author, found was that the Japanese were just as equally as important in the early 20th century as the Chinese were in the latter part of the 19th century. And that contribution got completely overlooked for some strange reason. And Clark Maccabee had taken it upon himself to do some work in kind of developing that thought about, the Japanese role. And while doing so, we kept stumbling across some very interesting facts about other ethnic groups. And I found that another marginalized group that had a profound role in the development of the railroads was the Native Americans. And for some strange reason, the picture's not showing here. Is it on none of the photos are showing. That's epic. Can you see? Well, that's kind of really unfortunate. Let me go back here.
Yeah, all I'm seeing is Northern Pacific Indian Scout right now, Russ.
Where are the photos?
Hang on, go back for a second here. I don't know. I saw it a second ago in something.
I know they were there. They were there.
I know.
I know they're there.
Let's just. Why don't we will take a quick commercial break, and Russ, why don't you try relaunching this and see what happens, and we'll get this thing rolling. Because
am I sharing?
Yeah, you're still sharing.
All right, let's unshare here.
Why don't you unshare and
sorry about that, kids.
Yeah, no, it's.
Let me close that out.
While you're working on that, Russ, I'm going to ask Steve. Steve, if you're here, can you unmute for a second? Steve, there you are. I want you to meet Beth Ann Mayer from the Mount Rainier Scenic Railway. Steve, just talk briefly about your railroad for a second and what you guys have been up to while Russ is working on his PowerPoint.
Oh, it figures that Russ would mess everything up,
Now, come on, he's my board president. Go ahead.
Hey, we have the same kind of problems you have, like I've talked about before. We are fighting constantly with the state of Hawaii, who owns our railroad tracks. They have been continuously just driving us up the wall. They're trying to put together a programmatic agreement regarding the amount of crossings coming through this historical railroad. What started out as a very simple process, they've turned, twisted, tied in a knot, and made a complete mess out of it. They now want to try to have someone, I'm assuming other than us, maintain the right of way, which is going to be literally impossible. If something breaks, we're supposed to call somebody, I guess, and have them come out and fix it. Well, we're the only game in town, so I don't know who they're going to call. It's just ridiculous, and they've gotten their quote marching orders. I can only guess from who, but they don't seem to want to protect this piece of history. It's that simple, and I have an idea of kind of what goes on at your place, and it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, just hold position. Russ, how are you coming? Are you making progress, or you need another minute or so?
No, I think I got it. Let me,
Okay, so we're gonna go back to our regularly scheduled program, folks. And Russ, you're still unable to share a screen, and that looks pretty good. And why don't we start with a slideshow from beginning, and let's see what happens.
yay. Okay.
Back to live
no,
action,
okay.
folks.
All right. So, yeah, I had loaded it onto the laptop, and then then I had to disconnect it to be able to get the camera to work. So now I figured out a way to be able to get both working at the same time. And so I have searched the internet all over the place trying to find a Native American scout. And this was the only one that I found that I could actually date back to the NP era. But the Northern Pacific used a number of Native Americans to be able to help them to be able to locate routes, especially through the Cascades and the Rockies. That is very important when you think about the engineering of the railroads. It is coming up with appropriate grades for the engines to be able to run upon. They also did some of the grading and some of the grubbing work that was usually left for the Chinese. There was actually a guy, probably Jack Christensen's probably old enough to remember him, back in the 1870s, named Daniel McLaughlin, who was the Northern Pacific Roadmaster in Montana. And he had said that they had hired Native Americans to be able to do grading and grubbing work. But he said they had a peculiar habit of leaving. Most guys usually would quit on payday. They'd get their money and they would run off. But he said he noticed something very interesting. Daniel McLaughlin said that whenever a new group of Native Americans, especially from a neighboring tribe, if they showed up into the camp, the Native Americans that had been working for the Northern Pacific would drop tools and they would leave. And Daniel McLaughlin could never figure out why they would do that, but it was really out of respect for their neighbors. They did not work from paycheck to paycheck. They worked from one area, what's called a usual and accustomed area for the tribe, to the next usual and accustomed area of the tribe. And when they didn't want to take a job away from the neighboring tribes, because that would create some type of tension, political tension between the tribal units. And so that's the reason why they would leave. A lot of the tribal members had come to figure out one thing that was very important, and that was it was a lot easier to be able to supply the camps with food than it was to actually do digging. So the tribal members would go out, and you got to remember the Northern Pacific had as many as 30 work camps going simultaneously in their construction. I know that was a fact with the construction of the NP Prairie line from Kalama to Tacoma. There was at least at one point there was as many as 30 camps that were open and had men staying there, and the Native Americans would provide either salmon or venison to each of those 30 camps, and they made a really good living hunting and fishing on behalf of the camps. The one thing that most people are familiar with are the Chinese. The sad part about the Chinese story is the fact that, you know, we cannot find a single reference to a first person writing regarding their experiences working for the railroad as a Chinese section person. The best reference that's out there, and I want to encourage each and every one of you to get a copy of this book if you can find it, is by Gordon Chang, named The Ghosts of Gold Mountain. And Gordon Chang is a professor of history at Stanford University, and he wrote the book Ghost of Gold Mountain. He is Chinese descent. And he also was rather taken aback by the fact that there are no first-person accounts, which is kind of odd. There are folks out there that seem to think that as many as 10,000 Chinese had been brought in from China to do work on the railroad, and as many as 15,000 to 50,000 letters had been sent from by the U.S. Postal Service. We know that through U.S. postal records from the West Coast back to China. So we know they could read and write. But we find that through the Cultural Revolution, anything that was considered Western was burned, and that included diaries, notebooks, maps, and so we've lost just about everything that's out there. The closest thing to a first-person account was actually written by a Chinese pastor of a Baptist church back in the Midwest, who had worked briefly in a section gang, but had spent some time. Most of the book that he wrote, which is still in existence, is regarding his work in proselytizing the Chinese. And so that's as close as we can get to coming to an understanding of what life was like for a Chinese laborer. The first Chinese that were brought into this area were brought in October of 1872. The graders were responsible for cutting brush, slash burning. They were also helped to create the subgrade profile, digging ditches. It was almost all shovel work. Most of the common white laborers made $1 a day. The Chinese were paid 80 cents, and of that 80 cents, they also had to pool their resources to be able to pay their camp cook and to be able to provide their own provisions, which that type of thing usually was provided for the whites if they were in a white camp. So it's kind of interesting how that kind of worked out. It's funny to note that there's a archaeological study that had been done in the Sierra Nevadas regarding the Chinese workers and the life. There's a number of them up by Truckee where they had found Chinese camps. The archaeologists went in there and excavated it, and they came to the conclusion that the Chinese actually lived a healthier lifestyle and ate a more balanced diet than the whites did, which may have given them considerable more stamina and strength in doing this very laborious tasks of grading and grubbing the right of way. There's a Kalama historian who had wrote that there were 700 Chinese had been brought through Kalama to be able to work on the Northern Pacific, on the first 25 miles of the line, which would basically is Kalama all the way up to Tenino. And that the thing that struck the Chinese the most was the size of the trees. They had never seen a tree so big before, and they were just aghast by the idea that they had to cut these things down because they were so big. Let's see. Here's an NP crew up on the Green River, and you can see that there's some Oriental faces there in the photographs. The NP was not the only group that had Chinese. The Oregon Railway and Navigation Company used Chinese rather liberally as well.
Russ, our slides are not advancing.
What are we on?
We're still on Northern Pacific Indian Scout, which is image number 2.
Why are they not? They're advanced. It says slide 4 on my presentation. Interesting.
The director doesn't like to get involved, but sometimes I just need.
Sometimes you've got to. Let's see.
I just want to, just so you know where we're at now. As far as I'm concerned, what you're saying is very, very interesting, and I'm fine without the slides advancing, but just so that you know, why don't you try now why don't you try slideshow and then from beginning, because this still looks like you're in a like a design mode.
I can't get this menu bar to move. What slide are you seeing now?
I'm still on Northern Pacific Indian Scout image number 2.
All right. Well,
Okay.
that's very unfortunate. Let's see.
We'll get there. I was just fascinated by what Russ was talking
End
about.
slideshow. All right.
So we'll
Stop.
get this
Okay.
down in a second. I see Chris Holland's on the program. Chris, you look like a square today, man. So anyway.
What are you seeing now?
You're not sharing your screen. We're just back to everybody smiling.
Oh, hold on a second. All right.
All right. Here we go, folks.
Boy, it's now Steve Vent can see why I don't do technical stuff.
I could have, well, we are where we are. And so let's just okay, now we're up to image 3. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Russ.
Why is it going? Let's see. So you're seeing Chinese section gang, right?
Right. Now go to slideshow up on the top. And from beginning.
I've got the menu bar.
There you go. Now this seems to be working. So I'm gonna just
NP survey crew, NP.
Yeah. Keep going.
Now what are you saying?
Now I see Wang Chung. I thought that was a
Okay, it's working.
Watchung.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so the Northern Pacific and many of the other railroads received the bulk of their labor through what was called labor tongs, and Watchung Company was the largest labor tong in Seattle. They had labor tongs in all the major Pacific Coast communities such as Portland, and but the biggest ones were in San Francisco Chinatown. The Watchung Company began in 1868 as a general merchandising store on Yesler Way, and the guy that started it was a guy by the name of Chun Ching Hock, and his partner Chun Hua. Chun Ching Hock settled in Seattle in 1860 after finding work as a cook at Yesler's Mill. And according to the 1860 census, he was the only person of Chinese descent living in King County. The Watchung Company was an overwhelming success, dealing not only in laborers for the railroad, but also general merchandising and selling things that were imported from China to the camps, things like tea and opium and stuff like that. The new venture was a windfall for the owners of the labor tongue in Seattle, so much so that Qin Shi He became a millionaire, and despite the fact that he had the money that he had, he still was not allowed by the railroads to be able to ride first class, even on the railroads that he had built, which is kind of interesting. When Chen Hua passed away, Qin Shi He was promoted to the managing partner of the firm, and he was a personal friend of James Coleman, where we get the name Coleman Dock from in Seattle. Coleman was a no-nonsense businessman whose eyes were not diminished by prejudice, and Qin Shi He was one of his most trusted advisors, and helped build the line out to Renton, and even bid on and won a contract to be able to build the railroad grade, a section of that railroad grade by himself using his own people, a section from Renton up to Newcastle in 1878. And then here's Chen Ching Hock later in life, and that's part of his obituary here. He went on to return to China with his fortune and built railroads in China, and then had them all taken away from him during the Cultural Revolution. The Chinese Expulsion Act was quite a black mark on our history. In November of 1885, we began systematically driving out Chinese out of communities based upon the need to protect white labor's jobs. The only problem was the jobs that the Chinese were doing were jobs that the whites didn't want. And after they drove them out, the railroad had a real difficult time being able to complete contracts on time. The problem was so acute that the Northern Pacific actually hid gangs up in the mountains of the Cascades, especially up by Stampede, to be able to continue work of blasting a grade through the mountains. Became kind of a don't ask, don't tell kind of a policy when it came to the Chinese, because they weren't supposed to be there after the Exclusion Act of 1885. Many of the Chinese, after the abuses of the Exclusion Act, went on to take less transitory jobs. They went on to work in canneries and things like that, and then became very important in truck farming, in raising produce throughout the West Coast, not just in the Puget Sound area. And here's some, the Great Northern had Chinese. They used them on a variety of different applications, but mostly for doing manual physical labor. The other thing that the Northern Pacific did was that they had, after the Exclusion Act of 1885, they had to hire Pinkerton guards to protect their Chinese workers. That's how important they were. And then after the bankruptcy of the Northern Pacific in 1873, there was a report that was written by the NP back in 1966 that said that if it hadn't been for the 200 Chinese workers that stayed on with the Northern Pacific from 1873 until about 1880, that the Northern Pacific would have never made it through the bankruptcy. There, and you're not going to believe this, but there's Chinese still working on the railroads, and they're working on them today in the United States and in China as well. The other thing that's really interesting about the Chinese is that the Exclusion Act of 1885 kind of opened the door for the import of Japanese labor because the Chinese were really smart. They figured out a way to be able to meet the labor need without violating the law. And what they did was they started importing Koreans and Japanese. And they just figured, well, you know, we'll keep bringing people in. They're not Chinese. And so they, sometime around 1890, they began the process of sneaking in Japanese and Koreans into the United States and hiring them out, and they could do that legally, which was really interesting because the Japanese, the imperial nation of Japan, was very much opposed to immigration, especially into the West, and so when the Japanese came here, they came in very small numbers, and I actually found, and for the life of me, it's in a box somewhere. I just moved to stately Holter Manor here in Lakewood, Washington, after living in Tacoma for 20 years. I ran across this very interesting telegram while the Milwaukee Road was building out towards Elby and Eatonville, Bethlehem. And the telegram said, go to the labor tongs and I want you to go to every labor tong on the West Coast, and I want you to find me every Chinaman that you can find that's available to continue this work up to Mount Rainier, and don't send us a Jap until you've hired every Chinaman on the West Coast. And I was like, this is actually in the telegram. You know, I'm reading this, you know, verbatim off this telegram, and I was thinking, why on earth would this guy say, don't send me a Jap until you've hired every Chinaman on the West Coast? And I read a really interesting book by a guy by the name of Professor Friday, which is kind of sounds like a cartoon character, but he had said that the Japanese, when they came to the United States, especially around 1900, they were more accustomed to working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. The Chinese, they were more accustomed to working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. So they were putting in 60 hours a week, while the Japanese were accustomed to working 40-hour weeks. And that created some tension between the rail foremen and the gangs, because the Japanese, once you got to Friday, they were expecting to have Saturday off to be able to rest, relax, and recreate. And then they also didn't like working from sunup to sundown. And to my way of thinking, I'm thinking, well, these Japanese guys are more American than we are. But the other thing that I found very interesting was that if one of those foremen tried to berate one of the Japanese workers, he was far more likely to find himself flat on his back. The Chinese were far more compliant. The Japanese, they were very far less compliant and more likely to fight back. So, hi, Rowdy, it's good to see you. So that's the Japanese. You may not have known that, but we did have Punjabi Indian laborers here in Washington State as well. They came on later. We see them I found them working in two different locations in Washington State. They helped build the East-West Railway in Pacific County, which was a logging railroad that ran out by Raymond. And then they also worked on the SP&S. And one of the things that was very interesting was that in doing some research on the Columbia River Gorge, that I stumbled across this fascinating article about how 7 of these East Indian men had been blown to smithereens by what's called the Lone Wolf Blast, where the rock crew had gone in and set charges in the Columbia River Gorge, and then they lit off the charges. And then every once in a while, not all of, let's say they set 10 charges, but only 9 of them went off. Well, these guys, after the blast takes place, they're supposed to go in there and they're supposed to shovel up the debris and get it clear the grade. And while they were swinging picks and busting away the loose rock, one of them actually hit one of those unexploded charges and blown these guys to smithereens. 7 East Indians were killed, and 2 Caucasian men, a guy by the name of Ivar Eriksson and a Swede named Christian Peterson, were also killed in that blast. And what was really interesting about the article in the paper was, they had gone into very elaborate detail as to the Punjabis' funeral arrangements that they had made for their colleagues, and wrote about it very extensively. And then here's the East Indian laborers also in Eastern Washington. So I'm assuming this is somewhere on the SP&S. We did have some African Americans. Most of those that, we don't see a large number of them coming in and working in the Northwest until World War II. Most of the African Americans that we see prior to World War II were often porters working for the passenger rail service. But after World War II, we see a lot of them migrating up into this area to be able to fill labor needs. Here's a porter up at Ashford. That's the Ashford Depot. And you can see the African American porter there standing on the end on the right. It's a Tacoma Eastern train, of course. But most frequently we see them serving a role as porters, and that was an awesome job to have. These guys, this was a highly desirable position, and it was a position of prestige. These guys were the best of the best, and those that excelled at their jobs ended up getting trained in Pullman standards on doing things other than just service. So if you were started off if you were lucky enough to get a job as an African American working for the Pullman Company, you might start off as a salad or sous chef. But if you continued on and you excelled at what you did, they would actually teach you the art of butchering and handcrafting meats and things like that, and you could become a chef. And those guys went on to establish some very lucrative careers later on. And August Derleth, who wrote the history of the Milwaukee Road, says that the Pullman dining car was the first integrated workspace in the United States, because you had both blacks and whites working together in very close quarters together. I had mentioned the Japanese the Japanese became very well established, especially in the areas around Mount Rainier. They would bring in their entire families with them, they were became part of the community. Bethan, you might be interested to know that during the Depression years, that Eatonville High School went on to win the baseball championships in consecutive years, all the way up until 1940. And then after Pearl Harbor, when they removed all the Japanese from around the Eatonville area, they never again won a baseball championship. And there were a lot of Japanese that worked in Eatonville. We know that they were also in the communities of Kirby and in Fairfax, Carbonado, and areas like that. Matter of fact, there were a lot of whites that refused to work in Pierce County because of the number of Japanese that were working in the logging camps, and Eatonville Lumber Company was a major supplier of labor for the Japanese. I was told that as far as the Eatonville Lumber Company Railway was concerned, they said that their Japanese rail foreman was far superior to any other rail foreman in Washington State. And that was quite a brag back then. This is a Japanese track crew that's working out in King County. This is a Schaefer camp. So that Schaefer camp is probably in Grays Harbor. That makes more sense. I don't know, Bethan, if you've seen this photo. This is out in front of the LB Depot.
That's a new one. I just sent a message, Russ, that we got a family ride about 2 weekends, maybe 3 ago, whose grandfather was from Eatonville and of Japanese descent and all that. But it was interesting. And then, of course, when I've started digging locally, it's been about some of the Japanese workers on our line. It's been controversial at best.
I had somebody tell me that this guy was a fireman, and I just laughed. I said, no, he was not a fireman. I said, look at the tender on the engine 9. It is completely full of coal, and he shoveled every single shovel of that coal into the back of that tender. No, the firemen definitely did not. Were not Japanese. These guys were the ones that filled the tenders because they didn't have the tipples. There's a wreck, and I never did figure out where this wreck was or what time it took place, which has always been a mystery for myself and Clark Maccabee. But they're fully half of the people that are in this photo are Japanese descent. That's Tacoma Eastern engine number 10 meeting engine number 5, and you can see the part of the tender there in the bottom, the tender of the other locomotive right there in the rear ender. And then this is in the depot in Morton. You find this, we found graffiti all over the Morton depot when we picked it up and moved it across town. And you see the word here, Kumasaki. And what's interesting about Mr. Kumasaki and where he had autographed the depot in Morton was that the signature was found right here underneath the sign. And he obviously knew that no one was going to find that graffiti for a long time. And Clark Maccabee went back to the census records of 1910. This was depot was dedicated on July 4th of 1910. Went back. 1910 was a census year, and they took that census just weeks before the depot was dedicated. And lo and behold, we had found Kumasaki. He was living in Mineral, which is just 7 miles north of Morton. And Kumasaki does show up on the census rolls in June, and he was working on the Morton Depot in July. So that all bears out. And there was some Japanese graffiti that was scrawled on some of the joists of the depot. And I don't remember what it says. Clark McAbee has all that information. But it was really cool. We took photos, sent it to an interpreter, and most of it was, construction related type stuff, cut this 2x4 this length, Harding Lumber Company was out in Graham. And if you look very carefully in the lower corner, you can see that there are a number of different Japanese names here, like Kurimoto and Katayama and Nikeo. And this was actually drawn by one of the children of the family members later in life, as he was reminiscing about growing up in the area out there in Graham and what the community looked like when he was a boy. Well, his parents were working for the Harding Lumber Company. His dad worked out in the woods, but his mother worked in the community hall and served also as a cook / flunky. During the war, we brought in Italians to help prisoners of war, to help fill war-related shortages. And if you've ever read the book On American Soil, I'd recommend you do it. It's about the biggest court-martial in U.S. Army history. And one of the Italian section workers, Giglioelmo Olivato, was being incarcerated at Fort Lawton. And they had entire companies of Italian POWs that were out there. And while you're incarcerated, if you earn the trust of of the people that were holding you, the guards, you could become a trustee. And if you're a trustee, you could earn things like passes. And you could go out and do jobs out in the field. And Giglioelmo Olivato was a trustee. In the Italian army, he was a truck driver. He was not a fighter. So he was not, when his unit got overran, he didn't pick up a gun and fight. He threw up his hands and said, yeah, go, please take me. I want to get out of here. And so they brought him to Fort Lawton. And unfortunately for Giglioelmo Olivato, he was lynched, murdered by a U.S. Army military police officer. And this guy was from the South. He absolutely hated anybody that wasn't white, and Italians were considered swarthy and dark. And this U.S. Army MP thought it would be hilarious if he lynched this guy out behind the African-American barracks. And so he killed Olivato by hanging him in the tree behind the barracks out there at Fort Lawton. And then, of course, because he was a military police officer, he got to lead the investigation, Steve, into the death of Olivato. And of course, he blamed it on the African Americans. And so there were 30 African Americans were indicted in the murder of Olivato, while meanwhile the cop got away with murder. So anyway, I could go on and on, but that's basically what I have for you as far as some of the contributions that have been made by various ethnic groups for the railroads in not only in Washington State, but in various other places. So if you've got any questions, feel free to shout them out, and I'll just go ahead and stop sharing now.
There's a
Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Becca.
I was just asking, you said you didn't have any first person stories of the Chinese workers. I was wondering if you had any or to what extent you had any of the Japanese or other ethnic groups.
Well, hopefully we'll we will be able to uncover some. I know that Clark Maccabee has some information. He and I are planning on teaming up to do some work on. Are you familiar with a place called the Tofu House?
Mhm.
Okay. We're hoping to be able to win that contract, and when we do that, we're going to provide some secondary information regarding the Japanese and their lifeways in Eatonville. There's one or two structures really that are on the Mount Rainier's service area in Eatonville that are still considered Japanese resources, and I'm hoping to be able to do a context of their contributions. One of those structures that is still standing is called the Tofu House, and I believe it's, I don't know how big it is. It's probably 10 by 10, and it provided an important source of protein for the Japanese during the early 20th century.
Yeah, that's cool. It's some, well, you know, obviously I got your info, so we'll connect offline at some point, but that's one of the things that we're working on for the museum is.
Because I
you know,
was
this
thinking
first
that what
person.
Russ is talking about is exactly the kind of stuff that you're looking for your museum, which is
Yeah.
more the human element of things. So
And we've had some really wonderful input from the Nisqually tribe too, about some of the shared history.
Oh yeah, Indian Henry was huge in the locating of the trails from Commencement Bay to Mount Rainier.
Hmm.
And I have an epic Jack Anderson story that I don't think anybody's ever told you. I worked for Jack Anderson and slept in the old business car number 99. That was my
Yep.
that was my home for a year. All right, so there was somebody else that had a question. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, so in Chuck Wood's book, Milwaukee Road West, they mentioned that around 1910 there was a great fire over by Tico,
Yes, it was
and
huge.
the section foreman and his Japanese employees started a backfire to save the town. And then in general, as a Union Pacific employee, I was aware that most of the UP section workers were, especially a little bit further east, were Navajos and Mexican Americans. So that adds a little bit more to the mix there as far as you know, who worked for who where and everything like that. And the Santa Fe, of course, was they probably them and the SP were also big on using Navajos for section foremen and workers.
When do you see Hispanics showing up on the railroad, George? Because I almost never find them before World War II.
So when I used to visit with my dad down at Tacoma Yard in the late 60s and early 70s before I went into service, we had a section foreman there named Bob Zamora, and I think he might have been from Arizona or New Mexico. And then in one of the UP info magazines, they highlighted some guys back in Wyoming, like Joe Lucero and his son that worked around Rollins and Laramie. So, and you know, I never thought about it because you know you always think of Wyoming as either Native Americans or white people, but quite a number of Mexican Americans were employed by UP up there. So, you know, they were all over the place on the UP system, and I'm sure probably a good amount of the SP and the Santa Fe.
Now, when I was working with Steve Vent, Steve has got a number of different rock formations on the ORNL that were hand built by Hawaiians, and I dare anybody to those rock features are so well constructed. I would dare any mason today to be able to construct a rock wall as solid as those down there. on the ORNL, right, Steve?
Steve is
Yeah.
muted.
Are you talking about Steve on the Hawaiian Railway?
Yes,
That's
I
who
am.
he's talking about, yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, that,
Back to
that
live action.
and the platform at Gilbert.
The platform at Gilbert was also constructed by Hawaiians.
Yeah. Because it's that free rock standing stuff.
Daniel,
Becky
are you
got her
leaving?
hand up, and then Daniel Cozine,
Yeah,
So I have a
thanks.
question. Oh, I'm sorry.
and then
No,
George. So you're behind
I'll
Daniel
stop
Cozine.
monopolizing
No,
soon.
no,
And I
it's
apologize.
okay.
I keep getting distracted by the George and Montgomery behind me. But I didn't know if any of the folks here, I just came across when I was researching a really cool program. It looks like Union Pacific and the Bureau of Indian Affairs did, like, railroads in Native America. It looked like it was a symposium they did, and I didn't know if they were gonna have another one, or if anyone had any information. I'd love to hear about it, because I went on a sort of bender and watched all of the recorded presentations that they have online, and it looks like that was a really, really cool partnership, from some organizations that don't always get to work together. And it had representatives from tribes sort of looks like all over the Midwest and the West Coast. And my background is in archaeology, so I can get real nerdy about it.
And Daniel Cozine, you're usually a font of information on this sort of stuff. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if Rosa would like a copy, but I have an original copy from March 1887, and it's a contract between the Northern Pacific and this Chinese labor supply guy who I can't begin to pronounce. And I think it was Twin Wu Charlie, I think is what I recall. Yeah, Twin Wu Charlie. And it goes into all kinds of detail. They had to have tea breaks every so often, how much they got paid and who did what. I mean, there's like 3 pages of this thing and in real tiny little print. So if that's something you'd be interested in, you can get a hold of me and I can get you a copy of it.
Oh, I'm always interested, Daniel. But you just really brought up a really good point, and that was, I told you about the census of 1910. In the Chinese were showing up in censuses beginning in 1860, and what's really funny, there's a kind of a funny story, Beth, and you'll appreciate being an anthropologist, is that the census takers that would go out in 1860, 1870, 1880, and 1890. They would go out to these camps, and they would go out and they would try to take a census of the Chinese, because taxing was based upon how many Chinese that you had, and so they had to have a count of them. And they would, especially in 1880, they would go out to these Chinese labor camps and they would ask people. They would say, what is your name? And the response would be Tom, Ahtom, AHTOM, or it would be John, or and so the census takers would write down this guy's name is AHJON or AHTOM, and in doing the research, in reading the book, The Ghost of Gold Mountain, what we found out from Gordon Chang was that in Mandarin means I am. So, so they weren't actually saying, their name. They were just saying, they would say I am Tom or I am John, and so we never do find out who these people really were. They almost never gave their full first and last name, because they were just simply answering a question that the census taker asked them.
Right. Well, and there's also several pages of this guy who was one of the engineering people for the Northern Pacific during the construction up there. And it goes into page after page of all the daily life that was going on. They ran out of food, and so they just go down the Green River and haul out buckets of fish, and they ran out of butter, and that practically caused a riot about the whole group there. So I have several pages of that too. That's kind of interesting there. So, and it turns out my grandfather was an engineer on Milwaukee, and he was on that train that ran into the Big St. Joe fire. And they got people loaded on the cars, and the cars were smoking, starting to burn, the wooden cars. And they managed to just get out of town in time. And it's a pretty harrowing story there.
Yeah, there's an epic book called The Big Burn that talks about that fire, because it started in in the Rockies of Montana, and people that it burned so fast because it was so hot that summer that people would dive into fish ponds or into streams thinking that they would escape the flames and would end up getting boiled to death. That's how hot it burned.
Suffocated there. Yeah, yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I want to know, when is the Tacoma Eastern Volume 2 coming out?
Oh, you've been asking me that question for 20 years.
Yeah, well, that's how these press conferences are, Mr. President. These backbenchers could take pot shots. So,
There was one other question.
Well, another thing I was asking there, Russell, have you read AC's book on the Union Pacific in the Northwest?
Oh yeah, no, that is a masterpiece, right, George?
You have both volumes?
I do too.
Do I have both volumes? I have volume 1. I have the first edition, and I think I got the second edition. I don't know if I got volume 2.
Okay.
yeah, they're two different publications because of the gap in time in technology. So, George, did you have something there?
Yeah, first of all, I was going to say volume 2 is done by the Historical Society, I believe. And then it's a much thicker volume, a bit more comprehensive and up to date with the more modern units and things like that. And then on the other part, I was going to ask Steve about the Hawaiian Railway. Was that railway used during World War II to transport munitions and supplies between, I'll say, Pearl Harbor and down over to Kaneohe and some of the outlying airfields and things like that?
It wouldn't have gone to Kaneohe. There's no railroad that ran to Kaneohe.
Okay.
But the Oahu Railway hauled about 2 million soldiers during World War II. They were in service pretty much 24 hours a day, running trains from town to Pearl Harbor, up around to the North Shore, different places along the Waianae coast. But they were rocking and rolling. The trains had little headlight covers for the darkness of the whole thing. It was they were just rocking and rolling. In fact, that was part of the downfall of the Oahu Railway. They ran everything pretty much into the ground.
Okay, now the other one that I always see some posters and stuff about is the Lahaina, Kaanapali, and Pacific. Is that on a different island?
Yes, it's on a different island and it no longer exists.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Then they
So
got burned to the
actually,
ground.
how did you know, Chuck Sewell, that I wanted to call on you because you're one of our resident Northern Pacific experts? Go ahead, please.
Actually, I'm going to talk about SP&S.
Well, there you go.
Rich
Sure,
Wilkins
why not?
found some stuff a while ago about Japanese labor on the SP&S, and including one of the main things was cancellation of a labor contract being supplied from Japan, and it was dated in this effective December 31st, 1941. So you can figure why the contract was canceled.
Yeah.
And there was one other thing about the Mexicans working on American railroads. Of course, we know that in Northern Pacific that happened during World War II, and we've got Ruth X's stories. Yep. And then there's also in the Walt Ainsworth NP location collection, there's a shot of some Japanese section workers that looks like it was taken somewhere near Kent. So, if that's, I don't know anything more about it than the fact that we figured out the location, and it's obviously Mexican track workers. But if there's an interest in that, I can dig out that picture for you.
Yeah, Ruth X's stories about her being terrorized by the Mexicans while she was up at Canasket, it was a really interesting story.
Yeah.
Yeah, Russell, I've got some personal letters from a guy who was a roadmaster for the Northern Division for decades on the NP. And I have some letters about his involvement with, these Mexican laborers they brought in during World War II. And it just goes into a whole bunch of details of things like that happened. So I have that available too, if it's interesting to you.
You bet.
Gary Tarbox, you've been quiet. You know a little bit about this stuff. Gary, are you there? Need to unmute. Hang on, George.
I was also going to ask about if there are any employment roles available from the archives of the railroads. I mean, you know, if you have things that are from way back when, I wonder if that would be a good source to find for a
Nope.
list of Japanese people.
They
Well,
were hired by the general contractors, and so that was one way
Oh.
to be able to dodge putting them on the rolls.
One of
Yes.
our good members in the NPRHA uncle was a boiler cleaner in Livingston, and he has researched a fair amount of work on it. It's John Fuji,
Oh, sure.
and that would be a source of some information on the Japanese.
Yes, very good point, Gary. Yeah, and John Fuji, NPRHA board member, as I recall, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, folks, this was a very interesting program today, and you would expect nothing less from our board president, Russell Holter. Russell, just a great presentation. And remind me now, you presented this at last year's NPRHA convention, didn't you?
In the one in Tacoma, yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. And
Next time you have me on, we should talk about the trolley disaster of 1900, because Jim Frederickson told me that was the darkest day in NP history. Well, it was,
Yeah.
a lot of people talk about the Great Northern and the White Cascade, 1910 being the worst day in Great Northern history. But I mean, nobody ever talks about the worst day in Northern Pacific history. There's 7 employees of the NP were killed that day. And Jim Frederickson said there was no other day like that. The most that number of employees I think that had been lost to the NP prior to that was probably 3. So
let me just check with our resident Tacoman expert, Mr. Chuck Soul. Chuck, can you just give us the bird's eye lowdown on this terrible event?
I actually don't know much of anything except what Russ has written about the trolley disaster.
thank you.
All right.
I know that there was another trolley disaster when the 11th Street streetcar went off the 11th Street Bridge when it was opened. I've heard about that, but I don't know how many people died.
As far as I know, it was only 1.
Yeah, and then the wharf collapse, I think there were only 2 casualties. One was an employee and one was the child of one of the employees.
Stepdaughter.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting, that was on Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
And the company's safe disappeared. And I have a sneaking suspicion I know where it is. And I did a present value of the contents and determined it would be about $900,000 worth of gold in there.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, well, Russ, you must have something else in the bag. We can call you, like this fall or something, and have you come back and entertain our audience again sometime. Is that something I can, shamelessly twist your arm into at some point? Maybe. All right. Fair enough.
July's coming up, and that would be a good time to do the trolley disaster, because it was July 4th, 1900, the darkest day in NP history.
John, there you go. So actually, it's interesting that you would bring that up, because I'm just going to, we're getting ready to wrap up today's program, and I wanted to just say that coming up in 2 weeks will be Christy Lake and perhaps Richard Anderson from the Northwest Railroad Museum. And then a friend of Gary Tarbach's and I, Dan Hagstad, a public broadcaster from Brainerd, Minnesota, will be giving us the history of the Northern Pacific from a Minnesotan perspective. And Dan's a very clever writer and creates some interesting topics. And then June 19th will be one of our absolute favorites here at PNRA, J. Craig Thorpe. Artist extraordinaire, will be back talking about the things that J. Craig Thorpe do. And then we're going to be taking a break for about 6-7 weeks this summer, where we won't have a program, but we've got a lot of this stuff up on YouTube these days. And, if you want, you can just go back and watch one of those old programs that you missed. So, does anybody have anything? Mickey's big hand is getting to point towards 6. George, go ahead, please. We're gonna wrap up here. in a
Yeah, I
sec.
just wanted to talk to Russ about, I want to send a check today, for a donation, so just make it out to PNRA. And the address on Southwest 153rd or wherever it's at.
425 Southwest 153rd, Burien, Washington. Isn't it 98168, Gary? Gary's muted.
I've been there,
6-6.
man.
66. 68,
Yeah,
I
like-
think, is the next block over. So
Yeah, like Tommy Chong would say, I've been there, man.
there you go. Well, and we've been here, folks, today, and again, Russell Holter, Board President, Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive and Master of Art History. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and I want to thank everybody for being here today, and go out and enjoy the beautiful weather. And Beth Ann, congratulations on the new cats. So that's always a good thing. Hope to see everybody in 2 weeks. And thanks again, everybody, for being here today. This is your host and moderator, Jonathan Fisher, saying thanks, everybody, and keep it level, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks, Jonathan.
Yep. See you, Russ.